Hunters pushed the grizzly bear from the cliff. What this baby did shocked everyone. Let us know where you're watching from. The morning fog clung to the Montana mountains like a protective blanket, hiding the horrors that would unfold that day. Logan Carter squinted through his binoculars, his breath creating small clouds in the chilly air. His hunting trip with his best friend Jacob Bennett was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway from their stressful jobs in the city. Neither man could have predicted how this day would change their lives forever. Logan lowered his binoculars and turned to Jacob, who was busy adjusting his rifle. "I think I saw something moving near that ridge," Logan whispered, pointing toward a rocky outcropping about 300 yards away. The fog shifted slightly, revealing the massive silhouette of a grizzly bear. Both men froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had permits for deer, not bears, and they knew how dangerous these creatures could be. The bear hadn't noticed them yet. It seemed to be digging for something in the ground, its powerful paws moving earth with ease. Logan was about to suggest they quietly retreat when a sound froze the blood in his veins. A child's laughter, distant but unmistakable. "Did you hear that?" he asked Jacob, his voice barely audible. Jacob nodded, his face suddenly pale. They scanned the area with renewed urgency and spotted what appeared to be a small cabin about half a mile down the slope from where the bear was foraging. Smoke rose from its chimney, suggesting someone was home. "We need to warn them," Jacob said, already stuffing his gear into his backpack. "That bear is too close to the cabin." They moved carefully, trying to keep their distance from the grizzly while working their way down toward the cabin. The bear suddenly lifted its head, sniffing the air. It had caught their scent. With surprising speed for such a large animal, it turned and began moving toward them. "Run!" Logan shouted, abandoning all attempts at stealth. They sprinted through the underbrush, the sound of breaking branches behind them indicating the bear was in pursuit. The path narrowed as they approached a steep cliff edge. Logan glanced back to see the massive animal gaining on them, its powerful muscles propelling it forward with frightening efficiency. Jacob stumbled on a rock and fell hard, his rifle skittering away across the ground. The bear was only 30 yards behind them now. Logan made a split-second decision. He pulled Jacob to his feet and reached for a large branch lying nearby. As the bear closed in, he waved the branch and shouted as loudly as he could, trying to make himself appear larger and more threatening. The grizzly rose to its full height, towering over 7 feet tall. Its roar echoed through the mountains, a primal sound that stripped away all pretense of human dominance in these wild places. Logan continued to shout, backing up slowly, pulling Jacob with him. They were now dangerously close to the cliff edge. What happened next would haunt Logan's nightmares for years to come. The bear charged. In their panic, both men dodged in opposite directions. The bear, unable to stop its momentum on the loose rocks, plummeted over the cliff edge with a surprised roar that faded as it fell. For several moments, neither man moved or spoke. The silence was broken only by their ragged breathing. Then the child's laughter echoed through the air again, closer this time. They turned to see a young woman with a baby strapped to her chest standing just a few yards away. Her eyes were wide with shock. "What have you done?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. Logan and Jacob exchanged bewildered glances, struggling to find words that could explain the chaotic scene that had just unfolded. The baby, strapped to the woman's chest, gurgled and reached out with tiny fingers toward the cliff edge, as if somehow aware of what had happened. "We didn't mean to," Logan began, but his explanation was cut short by the woman's raised hand. "That bear," she said, her voice gaining strength, "was Kodiak. He's been under my observation for the past 3 years. She shifted the baby on her chest and introduced herself. I'm Savannah Reed, wildlife biologist. This is my daughter, Lily. Jacob's face drained of color. You named a wild grizzly bear? Savannah's eyes narrowed. Kodiak wasn't just any bear. He was part of a critical research project studying grizzly adaptation to climate change in these mountains. She looked toward the cliff edge, her expression a complex mixture of scientific concern and personal loss. He was wearing a tracking collar worth more than your truck. The baby, Lily, began to fuss, small whimpers growing into distressed cries that echoed across the mountainside. Savannah gently bounced her, whispering soothing words that seemed to have little effect. The child's cries grew more insistent. We should check, Jacob said suddenly, moving toward the cliff edge. Maybe the bear survived the fall. Logan grabbed his arm. Are you insane? Even if it survived, it'll be injured and more dangerous than ever. Kodiak, Savannah corrected sharply. And Jacob's right, we need to check. If he's injured, he'll need help. If he's dead... She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the air between them. Years of research, lost in seconds. The three adults carefully approached the cliff edge, the baby's cries suddenly ceasing as if she sensed the gravity of the moment. Below, the slope was steep, but not a sheer drop as Logan had initially feared in the heat of the moment. About 60 feet down, the massive brown form of Kodiak lay motionless on a rocky outcropping. There's a path down over there. Savannah pointed to a narrow trail that wound its way down the mountainside. I know these mountains like the back of my hand. I can get us down there. Us? Logan questioned, still processing the bizarre turn of events. You can't be serious about bringing a baby down there. Savannah fixed him with a steely gaze. Lily goes where I go, and I'm going to check on Kodiak. The descent was treacherous, loose rocks skittering away under their boots as they carefully picked their way down the steep trail. Savannah moved with surprising agility despite the baby strapped to her chest. She seemed to know exactly where to place each foot, navigating the difficult terrain with practiced ease. As they neared the fallen bear, Logan and Jacob hung back, instinctively cautious. Savannah approached slowly, her free hand extended slightly as if she might touch the massive creature. Kodiak didn't move. He's breathing, Savannah announced, her professional demeanor momentarily cracking with relief. But he's badly injured. The fall broke his back leg, and he's unconscious. What do we do now? Jacob asked, shifting uncomfortably. We can't exactly call an ambulance for a grizzly. No, Savannah agreed, reaching for her satellite phone. But I can call my research team. We have protocols for situations like this. She dialed quickly, turning away to explain the situation to her colleagues. Logan and Jacob stood awkwardly, the weight of their actions settling over them like the afternoon shadows lengthening across the mountainside. The baby, Lily, stared at the injured bear with an intensity that seemed impossible for an infant. Her tiny hand reached out again, straining toward Kodiak. How old is she? Logan asked when Savannah finished her call. 10 months, Savannah replied, her tension divided between her daughter and the injured bear. She's never known a life without Kodiak. I've been bringing her into the field since she was 6 weeks old. Jacob's eyebrows shot up. You bring your baby around wild bears? A ghost of a smile crossed Savannah's face. Not as crazy as it sounds. I observe from safe distances, using tracking technology and cameras. Today was different. I was checking a camera trap near my cabin when I heard the commotion. Her expression hardened again. Help is at least 4 hours away. We need to stabilize him as best we can. The next hour passed in tense activity as Savannah directed the men in gathering materials to create a makeshift splint for the bear's broken leg. The massive animal remained unconscious, his breathing labored but steady. "He's going to wake up eventually," Logan pointed out, casting nervous glances at the bear. "And he's not going to be happy." "I have tranquilizers in my cabin," Savannah said. "One of you needs to go get them. The research kit is in a red backpack hanging by the door. Can't miss it." "I'll go," Jacob volunteered quickly, seeming eager to put distance between himself and the injured predator. As Jacob disappeared up the trail, Logan found himself alone with Savannah, Lily, and the unconscious bear. The silence between them was thick with unspoken accusations and questions. "I really am sorry," Logan finally said. "We weren't hunting bears. We were just trying to protect ourselves." Savannah's face softened slightly. "I understand fear, but this is the problem with humans in wilderness areas. We act before we understand." She looked down at her daughter, who had fallen asleep against her chest. "Lily will grow up in a world with fewer wild places and fewer wild creatures because of moments like this." A low growl interrupted their conversation. Kodiak's eyes were open, disoriented but alert. The massive bear tried to rise, then collapsed with a roar of pain that sent birds scattering from nearby trees. "Don't move," Savannah whispered to Logan, who had instinctively reached for his hunting knife. "No sudden movements." The bear's gaze locked onto them, recognition and confusion visible in his intelligent eyes. He growled again, softer this time, his massive head swinging toward Savannah and the baby. What happened next defied all of Logan's understanding of wild animals. Lily awoke with a start and turned toward the bear. Instead of crying in fear, she let out a delighted gurgle and waved her tiny hands excitedly. Kodiak's aggressive posture shifted, his growl fading to a curious rumble. "She recognizes him," Savannah explained in a hushed voice. "And he recognizes her. Kodiak has seen Lily since she was newborn. There's a connection there that science can't fully explain." Logan watched in amazement as the massive predator's eyes followed the baby's movements with what could only be described as gentleness. The bear's massive paw, capable of killing with a single swipe, shifted slightly on the ground, almost like a gesture of acknowledgement. The sound of running footsteps announced Jacob's return. He burst into the clearing, red backpack in hand, and froze at the sight of the conscious bear. "Don't move," Savannah called out, her voice calm despite the tension in her body. "He's aware, but not aggressive. Toss me the bag, very gently." Jacob complied, his movements slow and deliberate. The backpack landed softly by Savannah's feet. With practiced efficiency, she retrieved a loaded tranquilizer dart and injection system, never taking her eyes off Kodiak. "What I'm about to do requires absolute stillness from both of you," she instructed. "When he's sedated again, we'll have about an hour to better stabilize his leg before my team arrives." Logan and Jacob nodded silently, barely breathing as Savannah prepared the tranquilizer. Kodiak watched her movements, making no attempt to escape or attack, his attention still partially focused on the baby. Just as Savannah raised the injection gun, a distant sound broke the tense silence, the unmistakable roar of another bear. Kodiak's head lifted, his nostrils flaring as he caught the scent on the wind. His response was immediate and surprising, a protective growl as he shifted his massive body to position himself between the humans and the direction of the approaching bear. "That's Kiana," Savannah whispered, her face suddenly pale. "Kodiak's mate, and she'll be much less understanding about this situation." The ground seemed to tremble as a second massive grizzly appeared at the top of the ridge, her powerful form silhouetted against the afternoon sky. Kiana's roar shook the very air around them, a primal declaration of rage and protectiveness that made Logan's instincts scream for him to run. But there was nowhere to run. They were trapped on the mountainside, an injured bear before them and an enraged one approaching rapidly from above. "Don't move," Savannah hissed, her arms tightening protectively around Lily. "Whatever happens, do not run. Running triggers their predatory instinct." Logan and Jacob stood frozen, faces pale with fear, as Kiana's massive form lumbered down the slope, each powerful step sending small avalanches of loose stones cascading around them. The female grizzly was even larger than Kodiak, her muscular shoulders humped with power, her claws like curved daggers capable of disemboweling a man with a single swipe. Kodiak attempted to rise again, his injured leg buckling beneath him. His pain-filled growl seemed almost like a warning to his mate. Kiana paused momentarily, her head tilting as if communicating with her injured partner. The complex social dynamics between the two bears was evident even to the terrified humans watching the silent exchange. "She's assessing the situation," Savannah whispered, barely moving her lips. "Grizzlies are incredibly intelligent. She's trying to understand what happened." Then little Lily, seemingly oblivious to the mortal danger surrounding them, let out a happy squeal and reached toward Kiana with the same recognition she had shown Kodiak. The female bear's attention snapped to the baby, her predatory gaze locking onto the small, vulnerable human child. Logan's hand inched toward his hunting knife, a futile gesture against such overwhelming force, but the only defense he could imagine. Jacob trembled visibly beside him, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Lily knows her too," Savannah explained in a barely audible voice. "I've documented their interactions from safe distances since Lily was born. There's something unusual about how these bears respond to her." Kiana approached slowly, her massive head swinging between her injured mate and the human she clearly viewed as responsible for his condition. She released another thunderous roar that seemed to shake the very mountain beneath their feet. Savannah did something then that defied all logic and self-preservation instinct. Slowly, deliberately, she knelt down, still cradling Lily to her chest, and lowered her eyes in a gesture of submission. The baby continued making excited noises, apparently delighted by the presence of the enormous predator. "What are you doing?" Jacob hissed, his voice cracking with fear. "Trust me," Savannah replied without looking up. "This is our only chance. Get down, both of you. Show submission. Do not look directly at her eyes." Against every natural instinct, Logan slowly lowered himself to a kneeling position, his gaze fixed on the ground. From the corner of his eye, he saw Jacob reluctantly do the same, his body shaking uncontrollably. Kiana approached cautiously, her massive head lowered to sniff at Kodiak's injured form. The male bear rumbled something that sounded almost like reassurance. Then, with deliberate steps that made the ground tremble, Kiana moved toward the kneeling humans. Logan could smell her wild, musky scent as she drew near, an ancient, primal odor that spoke of deep forests and mountain winds. He felt her hot breath on his neck as she sniffed him, investigating the strange creatures who had harmed her mate. His heart hammered so violently in his chest, he was certain the bear could hear it. Then came a sound that pierced the tension, Lily's delighted laughter. The baby had spotted a butterfly fluttering near Savannah's shoulder and was reaching for it with chubby fingers, completely unfazed by the enormous predator looming over them. The sound seemed to trigger something in Kiana. Her aggressive posture softened almost imperceptibly. She moved towards Savannah and the baby, her approach now more curious than threatening. Savannah remained perfectly still, but Logan could see the storm of emotions crossing her face, scientific fascination battling maternal terror. Kiana's massive snout came within inches of Lily's tiny form, The baby, fearless in her innocence, actually reached out and touched the grizzly's nose with a gentle pat that would have been comical in any other circumstance. A soft sound emerged from the bear's throat. Not a growl, but something that sounded almost like a purr. "Impossible," Jacob whispered, breaking the spell. Kiana's head swung toward him, her eyes narrowing. The moment of connection broken, she rose to her full height, towering over them with renewed aggression. What saved them came from an unexpected source. Kodiak released a pained grunt and attempted to rise again. Kiana immediately turned her attention back to her injured mate, moving to his side with surprising gentleness for such a massive creature. "Now's our chance," Jacob urged, already beginning to back away. "We need to get out of here while she's distracted." "No," Savannah said firmly. "If we leave now, we're abandoning Kodiak to a slow death. The tranquilizer will let us stabilize him until my team arrives." "That's insane," Jacob argued, his voice rising. "That female will tear us apart the moment we make a move toward him." Logan found himself caught between them, his hunter's instinct to escape warring with a growing sense of responsibility for the injured bear. The tracking collar around Kodiak's neck caught his eye, a reminder that this wasn't just any wild animal, but a creature of scientific importance, a being with a name and a purpose beyond simply existing in these mountains. "I'll help," he decided suddenly. "Tell me what to do." Savannah's eyes reflected surprise and gratitude. "We need to sedate him first. Then we can splint the leg properly and administer antibiotics to prevent infection." Jacob stared at them both in disbelief. "You're both crazy. That female bear is going to kill us all." "Then go," Logan told his friend. "Head back to the cabin. No one would blame you." The silence that followed was broken only by Kodiak's labored breathing and the soft sounds of Lily playing with the Savannah's jacket zipper. Finally, Jacob's shoulders slumped. "Fine, but if we die, I'm going to haunt you for eternity." Savannah's plan was methodical, but fraught with risk. While Kiana remained distracted by her mate's condition, she would administer the tranquilizer. Once Kodiak was sedated, they would need to work quickly to splint his leg before the female bear became too protective. "The key is to include her in the process," Savannah explained. "Let her see that we're helping, not hurting him." "Include her?" Jacob repeated incredulously. "She's not a curious bystander. She's 1,000 pounds of apex predator with a bad mood." "Bears are smarter than you think," Savannah replied, her professional knowledge momentarily overriding her fear. "They understand more than we give them credit for." With agonizing slowness, Savannah readied the tranquilizer gun again. Lily, sensing the tension, had grown quiet, her wide eyes taking in the scene with an awareness that seemed beyond her months. "On my signal," Savannah whispered, "I'll dart Kodiak. Logan, you have the splint materials ready. Jacob, you keep talking to Kiana." "Talk to her?" Jacob sputtered. "What am I supposed to say? Nice weather we're having. Please don't eat me." "Just speak in a calm, soothing voice. It's not the words that matter, it's the tone." As Savannah raised the tranquilizer gun, a terrible crack of thunder split the air. The storm that had been threatening all afternoon had finally arrived. Fat raindrops began to fall, quickly increasing to a downpour that limited visibility and turned the already treacherous slope into a muddy hazard. Lightning flashed, illuminating the scene in stark white light. The injured bear, his protective mate, and the 3 humans caught in a situation that defied all normal wilderness encounters. The thunder that followed startled Kiana, who released a roar of alarm and moved closer to Kodiak. "Now!" Savannah shouted over the storm, squeezing the trigger. The dart flew true, embedding itself in Kodiak's shoulder. The bear grunted in surprise, then turned to Savannah with what looked remarkably like betrayal in his intelligent eyes. Kiana reacted instantly, charging toward them with a speed that belied her massive size. "Talk to her, Jacob," Savannah yelled, shielding Lily with her body. Jacob stood his ground, rain plastering his hair to his forehead as he raised his hands and began speaking in a surprisingly steady voice. "Easy, girl, easy. We're trying to help him. We're not going to hurt him anymore." Miraculously, Kiana slowed, her charge becoming a cautious approach. She sniffed the air, confusion evident in her posture as she processed the competing sense of fear, determination, and the familiar smell of her mate. Kodiak's eyes began to droop as the tranquilizer took effect. He slumped to the ground with a heavy thud that Logan felt through the soles of his boots. Kiana whined, a surprisingly vulnerable sound from such a formidable creature, and nudged her mate's unconscious form. "Now we work," Savannah said, handing Lily to Logan without warning. "Hold her. I need both hands." Logan found himself cradling the baby awkwardly against his chest, her tiny weight almost nothing compared to the gear he typically carried on hunting trips. Lily looked up at him with curious eyes, completely unafraid despite the chaos surrounding them. For the next 45 minutes they worked in the pouring rain, Savannah directing them with the precision of a battlefield surgeon. They cleaned Kodiak's wound, set the broken bone with makeshift splints crafted from branches and the first aid supplies from Savannah's pack, and administered antibiotics using a second dart. Throughout it all, Kiana circled them warily, occasionally approaching to sniff their work before retreating again. Her behavior defied everything Logan had ever learned about bear encounters in the wild. She seemed to understand, on some level, that they were helping. "The sedative will wear off in about an hour," Savannah explained as she tied off the last bandage. "By then, my team should be close. They'll bring proper equipment to transport him safely." As if on cue, Lily began to cry, a hungry, tired wail that echoed across the mountainside. Kiana's head snapped up, her attention riveted on the distressed baby. Before anyone could react, she moved toward Logan with purposeful strides. "Don't move," Savannah warned, her voice tight with renewed fear. "Let her come to you." Logan stood paralyzed, the crying baby in his arms as the massive grizzly approached. Kiana stopped just feet away, her nose twitching as she scented the child. Then, to Logan's astonishment, she made a soft, chuffing sound, the same sound he had heard mother bears use with their cubs during previous hunting trips. Lily's crying subsided at the sound. She hiccuped once, then reached toward the bear with complete trust. Logan's arms tightened instinctively around her, but Savannah placed a restraining hand on his shoulder. "Let me have her," she said softly, taking her daughter back. "I need to show you something." With deliberate movement, Savannah knelt before Kiana, holding Lily where the bear could see her. Then, in a voice filled with emotion, she began to tell a story that would forever change how Logan viewed the relationship between humans and wild animals. "3 years ago," she began, her eyes never leaving Kiana's massive form, "I was 8 months pregnant with Lily. I was out checking camera traps just like today. I slipped on a wet rock and fell down a ravine, breaking my ankle. I couldn't move, couldn't call for help. Night was falling, and the temperature was dropping rapidly." Logan and Jacob exchanged glances, suddenly understanding that this story was leading somewhere unexpected. "I thought I was going to die out here," Savannah continued, rain streaming down her face, indistinguishable from tears. "Then Kodiak found me. He and Kiana had been subjects of my research for months by then. They recognized me, I think. Instead of attacking, they stayed with me. All night they lay on either side of me, keeping me warm with their body heat until my research partner found me the next morning. Lily babbled happily, reaching toward Kiana without fear. The massive bear lowered her head, allowing the tiny human hand to touch her wet fur. 2 weeks later, Lily was born, Savannah said softly. When I brought her into the field for the first time, both bears approached my observation blind. They'd never done that before. It was as if they knew she existed because they had felt her kicking inside me that night, as if they recognized her. The rain began to ease, the storm moving past them as quickly as it had arrived. In the sudden quiet, the only sounds were Kodiak's steady breathing and Lily's content murmurs. "That's impossible," Jacob whispered, but there was doubt in his voice. "I've documented it all," Savannah replied. "Hundreds of hours of footage showing behaviors that defy conventional understanding of bear cognition and social recognition. These bears recognize my daughter. They protect her, just as they protected me that night." Logan stared at the scene before him, a wildlife biologist and her baby communing with one of nature's most feared predators, and felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of the natural world. The clear divisions he had always perceived between human and animal, between civilization and wilderness, suddenly seemed less absolute. A distant sound caught their attention, the mechanical whir of an approaching helicopter. Savannah's research team had arrived faster than expected, likely pushing through the storm to reach them. "They'll land in that meadow up the slope," Savannah said, rising to her feet with Lily secure in her arms. "They'll have a transport sled for Kodiak." Kiana's head lifted at the unfamiliar sound, her posture tensing with renewed wariness. Savannah approached her carefully, speaking in the same soothing tones she had used throughout this extraordinary encounter. "It's going to be okay," she told the bear, as if Kiana could understand every word. "They're going to help him. You can follow us if you want. No one will hurt either of you." As the helicopter drew closer, Logan and Jacob prepared to help move the sedated Kodiak up the slope to the landing site. But before they could begin, Kiana did something that none of them expected. She turned to Savannah and made a soft moaning sound, then gently, almost delicately, touched her nose to Lily's foot. The baby giggled in delight, completely at ease with the massive predator. Then, with a final look at her unconscious mate, Kiana turned and lumbered up the slope toward the approaching helicopter, as if leading the way for the humans to follow with her injured partner. "She's showing us the path," Savannah said, wonder evident in her voice despite her scientific training. "She's helping us help him." As they struggled to carry the massive sedated bear up the treacherous slope, following in Kiana's enormous footprints, Logan found himself reevaluating everything he thought he knew about the natural world and humanity's place within it. The simple hunting trip that had begun this extraordinary day seemed like it had happened in another lifetime. The helicopter touched down in the small meadow, rotor wash flattening the wet grass in concentric circles. A team of 4 researchers spilled out, equipment in hand, moving with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to wildlife emergencies. Their initial shock at seeing Kiana standing calmly at the edge of the clearing quickly gave way to focused professionalism as Savannah explained the situation. With careful coordination, they loaded the sedated Kodiak onto a special transport sled, attaching monitoring equipment to track his vital signs. Throughout the process, Kiana watched from a distance, her massive form perfectly still, except for the occasional twitch of her ears. "We've never had an opportunity like this," one of the researchers, a tall man with a weather-beaten face, told Logan and Jacob. "A chance to treat an injured bear with his mate present and non-aggressive. This is unprecedented data." "Where will you take him?" Logan asked. watching as they secured Kodiak's massive form for transport. "We have a wildlife rehabilitation facility about 20 miles from here," the researcher explained, "specially designed for large predators. He'll receive surgery for his leg and remain under observation until he's healed enough for release." "And her?" Jacob nodded toward Kiana, who continued her vigilant watch from the tree line. The researcher shook his head in amazement. "In any other situation, we'd tranquilize her too, for safety. But Savannah has convinced us to try something different. We're going to let her follow on her own terms." Savannah approached them, Lily now sleeping peacefully against her chest despite the noise and activity surrounding them. "These bears have something to teach us," she said simply. "Something about recognition, about memory, about the connections possible between species we've always considered separate and opposed." As the helicopter lifted off with its precious cargo, Kiana released a mournful call that seemed to follow them into the darkening sky. Then, with surprising speed and determination, she began to move through the forest in the direction the helicopter had taken, following her mate's journey from the ground. "She'll track him," Savannah said with certainty, "all the way to the facility, and when we release him back into these mountains, they'll find each other again." Logan and Jacob stood in silence as twilight settled over the mountains, the extraordinary events of the day settling around them like the mist that began to rise from the cooling earth. The familiar wilderness suddenly seemed like a foreign country, filled with intelligences and relationships they had never before imagined. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if we'd shot them," Logan said finally, voicing the thought that had been haunting him since Savannah had shared her story. "We would never have known. About her, about them." He gestured to where Lily slept peacefully in her mother's arms. "About what they did for both of you that night." Savannah studied him for a long moment, her expression softening. "That's the tragedy of our relationship with the wild," she said. "Too often, fear prevents understanding. We destroy what we don't comprehend, and then the opportunity for knowledge is lost forever." As they made their way back to Savannah's cabin in the gathering darkness, a single howl echoed across the valley. Not a wolf, but Kiana, calling out to her absent mate. The sound carried with it something ancient and powerful, a reminder that the wilderness and its inhabitants were not simply resources to be harvested or obstacles to be overcome, but beings with their own complex lives and relationships. In Savannah's arms, Lily stirred at the sound, her tiny face turning toward it as if in recognition. The bond between this human child and the massive predators defied explanation, yet its reality could not be denied. "Will you tell people about this?" Jacob asked as the lights of the cabin came into view. "About what happened today?" Savannah considered the question as she shifted Lily to her other arm. "Science requires evidence," she said finally. "And what happened today, what's been happening between these bears and my daughter, challenges everything we think we know about interspecies recognition and bonding. I'll document it all, but no one will believe it," Logan finished for her. Savannah smiled, a tired but genuine expression. "Some will, those who are ready to reconsider the boundaries we've drawn between ourselves and other intelligent beings. Those who are willing to accept that there might be connections in this world that we don't yet understand." As they reached the cabin, a soft ping from Savannah's satellite phone announced an incoming message. She checked it quickly, her face lighting up with relief. "Kodiak's made it to the facility. He's stable and prepped for surgery." She looked toward the distant tree line. "And the team reports that Kiana has already been spotted near the perimeter fence." She found him. Inside the warm cabin, as Savannah prepared a belated dinner for them all, Logan found himself drawn to the wall of photographs documenting her years of research. Among them was a series showing Kodiak and Kiana at various distances from the cabin, their massive forms clearly recognizable across seasons. And in the most recent photos, a tiny bundle was visible in Savannah's arms as she observed the bears from her blind. One image in particular caught his attention, a remarkable shot captured by a motion-sensitive camera. It showed both bears standing at the edge of the clearing where the cabin stood, their attention focused on something just out of frame. The date stamp showed it was from just 2 months ago. "What were they looking at?" he asked, pointing to the photo when Savannah approached. "Lily," she replied simply. "I had set her carrier down just outside the cabin while I collected firewood. When I turned around, they were both there, watching her. Not threatening, just watching. I froze, of course, but they never approached. After a few minutes, they simply turned and disappeared back into the forest." "And you weren't afraid?" Jacob asked, joining them by the wall of images. Savannah considered this, her gaze drifting to where Lily now slept peacefully in a portable crib. "I was, at first," she admitted, "but then I remembered that night in the ravine. How they chose to protect rather than harm. How they seemed to recognize that I carried life within me." She touched the photograph gently. "There are mysteries in the natural world that we've barely begun to understand." Later that night, as Logan stood on the cabin's small porch staring up at the star-filled sky, he found himself haunted by the day's events. The sounds of the forest surrounded him. The rustle of wind through pine needles, the occasional call of a nightbird, the distant rush of the stream that ran through the valley below. Somewhere out there, Kiana kept her lonely vigil outside the rehabilitation facility, waiting for her mate to recover. A soft noise behind him announced Savannah's presence. She joined him at the railing, her gaze following his into the darkness. "What will happen to your research now?" he asked quietly, mindful of the sleeping child inside. "It will continue," she replied, "but with a new focus. Not just on how these bears adapt to changing climate conditions, but on the cognitive and social capacities they've demonstrated, on what they might be able to teach us about interspecies communication and recognition. And Lily? Will she be part of it?" Savannah smiled softly. "She already is. I don't fully understand the connection she has with them, but I know it's real. Perhaps it's something as simple as the fact that they've known her scent since before she was born. Perhaps it's something more complex that science doesn't yet have the tools to measure." She paused, considering. "Or perhaps it's exactly what it appears to be, a relationship that transcends the barriers we believe exist between humans and wild animals." A sound from the forest edge caught their attention, a soft huffing noise that Logan now recognized. Without warning, Kiana's massive form emerged from the shadows, her outline barely visible in the moonlight. She stood at the tree line, looking directly at the cabin, at them. "She came back," Logan whispered, amazement overriding any fear he might have felt. "She's checking," Savannah replied quietly, "making sure Lily is safe." As if in response to her name, a thin cry came from inside the cabin, Lily awakening from her sleep. Kiana's ears pricked forward at the sound. She rose briefly to her hind legs, scenting the air, then dropped back to all fours with a soft grunt that sounded almost like satisfaction. Then, with one final look toward the cabin, she turned and melted back into the darkness of the forest, leaving Logan and Savannah standing in wonder at the extraordinary bond that had formed between a human child and the wild creatures most feared in these mountains. Inside, Lily's cries subsided as Jacob gently rocked her crib. The baby's eyes were wide open, staring at the cabin window that faced the direction where Kiana had stood just moments before. A small smile crossed her tiny face, as if she knew exactly who had come to check on her. a massive, wild guardian ensuring her safety from the shadows of the forest. "You know," Savannah said as they turned to go back inside, "there's a theory among some indigenous cultures that children possess a special connection to the natural world that adults have lost, that they can perceive and communicate across boundaries that become impenetrable as we grow older and more separated from nature." She glanced back toward where Kiana had disappeared. "Maybe what we witnessed today isn't as impossible as it seems. Maybe it's simply a connection that most of us have forgotten how to see." Logan nodded, the hunter in him forever changed by what he had experienced on this extraordinary day in the mountains. The line between human and animal, between civilization and wilderness, no longer seemed as clear and absolute as it once had. In its place was something more complex, more nuanced, a recognition that perhaps, in ways science was only beginning to understand, all life on this planet was connected in a web of relationships far more intricate than humanity had imagined. And somewhere in the darkness, a baby's delighted recognition of a massive predator, and that predator's gentle response, had revealed a glimpse of what those connections might mean, if only we had the wisdom to perceive them. 3 years later. The summer sun filtered through the pine branches, creating dappled patterns of light on the forest floor. Logan Carter adjusted his camera lens, focusing carefully on the scene unfolding before him. He had traded his hunting rifle for a camera 2 years ago, his perspective on wilderness forever altered by the events of that stormy day in the mountains. "Is that good?" Savannah called softly from her position at the research blind 20 yards away. She was helping to document the extraordinary relationship that continued to evolve between her daughter and the bears that had become the focus of international scientific attention. Logan gave her a thumbs up, his finger hovering over the shutter button. Through his telephoto lens, he could clearly see 4-year-old Lily sitting on a fallen log at the edge of the small meadow. She was reading aloud from a picture book, her small voice carrying clearly in the still mountain air. The words were simple children's fare about animals and friendship, but it was her audience that made the scene remarkable. Kodiak and Kiana lay in the tall grass just 10 yards from the child, their massive forms relaxed and attentive. Kodiak's leg had healed well after the surgery, though he still carried a slight limp when the weather turned cold, a permanent reminder of his fall from the cliff. Between the adult bears played 2 cubs, born the previous spring, their chocolate-brown forms tumbling in playful combat as their parents listened to the human child's story. "They're here," Jacob's voice came through Logan's earpiece. He was stationed in another blind on the opposite side of the meadow, part of the expanded research team that now studied this unprecedented phenomenon of interspecies connection. Logan swung his camera toward the tree line, capturing the arrival of the research center's director and the documentary film crew that had been following the project for the past year. Their presence had been approved only after months of careful habituation, ensuring that the bears remained comfortable and unstressed by the additional human observers. The project that had begun as Savannah's solitary study of grizzly adaptation to climate change had evolved into something far more profound, an exploration of animal cognition, interspecies recognition, and the possibilities for coexistence between humans and the wild creatures with whom they shared the planet. Lily turned the page of her book, completely at ease in the presence of creatures that most humans feared above all others. The smallest cub, a female they had named Echo, broke away from her roughhousing with her brother and approached the log. With the innocent courage that mirrored Lily's own, the cub climbed onto the log and settled beside the human child, peering curiously at the colorful pictures in the book. Savannah's sharp intake of breath was audible through the earpiece, but there was no fear in the sound, only wonder. This unprecedented level of trust between the young of both species had been building for months, each encounter carefully documented but never forced. "Are you getting this?" the documentary director whispered urgently into his microphone. "Every frame," Logan confirmed, his camera capturing the extraordinary moment. A human child and a bear cub sitting side by side, sharing a story in the wilderness. What had begun in fear and near tragedy on that stormy mountainside had transformed into something none of them could have imagined. The research papers Savannah had published, documenting the cognitive abilities and emotional intelligence of these bears, had revolutionized understanding of animal consciousness. The footage of Lily's interactions with the bear family had challenged humanity's perception of the boundaries between species. Not everyone had accepted these findings, of course. There had been skeptics and critics who warned of the dangers, who claimed the bear's behavior was anomalous, or that the researchers were anthropomorphizing normal animal responses. But for those who had witnessed the relationship firsthand, there could be no doubt that something extraordinary was occurring in these mountains, something that defied conventional understanding of wild animal behavior. "She's reading about bears," Jacob said softly through the communication system, a touch of amusement in his voice. "The irony isn't lost on me." Indeed, the picture book Lily had chosen that day featured cartoon bears having adventures in a forest. As she turned to a page showing a mother bear with her cubs, she looked up at Kiana and pointed to the illustration, as if making sure the real bear understood the connection. Kiana rumbled softly in response, a sound that the research team had cataloged as positive engagement rather than warning. Over 3 years of careful documentation, they had identified more than 20 distinct vocalizations that the bears used specifically when interacting with Lily, sounds that were rarely or never recorded in other bear-to-bear or bear-to-human interactions. The sun dipped lower toward the western peaks, casting long shadows across the meadow. Soon it would be time to end the day's observation session, to return to the research station that had been established a mile away from the bear's primary territory. But for now, the cameras continued to roll, capturing precious minutes of this unprecedented communion between species. Lily finished her story and closed the book. The bear cub sniffed at the cover one final time, then scampered back to her mother. Kiana nuzzled her offspring gently, then rose to her full height, towering over 7 feet tall. She made a soft huffing sound, the signal that had come to mean the interaction was ending for the day. Lily nodded as if she understood perfectly, gathering her book and the small backpack she carried. "Goodbye, Echo," she called to the cub. "Goodbye, Kodiak and Kiana. See you tomorrow." The adult bears rumbled in response, then began herding their cubs toward the forest edge. They paused once at the tree line, looking back at the small human child who waved enthusiastically from the meadow's center. Then, with the silent grace that belied their enormous size, they disappeared into the shadows beneath the pines. Savannah emerged from her blind and walked to her daughter, kneeling to embrace her. Logan captured this moment too, the researcher who had devoted her life to understanding these magnificent creatures, and the child who had formed a bond with them that transcended the normal boundaries between human and wild. Later that evening, as the research team reviewed the day's footage in the comfortable main room of the station, the conversation turned philosophical, as it often did. What we're witnessing challenges everything we thought we knew about the relationship between humans and wild predators, the project director said, shaking his head in wonder as they watched the playback of Echo sitting beside Lily. "The question is whether this is truly unique, a 1 in a million connection between these specific bears and this specific child, or whether it represents a potential that exists more broadly." "I think it's both," Logan offered, setting down his mug of coffee. The circumstances that brought them together were extraordinary. Savannah's accident, the bear's decision to protect rather than harm her, Lily's prenatal exposure to their presence. That can't be replicated. He paused, watching the footage of Lily reading to her attentive Ursine audience. But what it reveals about the capacity for interspecies recognition and bonding, that has universal implications. Jacob, who had initially been the most skeptical of them all, nodded thoughtfully. "I keep thinking about all the bears I've hunted over the years," he said quietly. "How many of them might have had this capacity that we never recognized? How many connections we've severed without ever knowing they were possible?" The room fell silent as they contemplated this sobering thought. Then a small voice broke the stillness. "Mommy, can I show them my drawing?" Lily stood in the doorway in her pajamas, a piece of paper clutched in her small hand. Savannah smiled. "Of course, sweetheart. Then it's bedtime." Lily patted across the room and handed her drawing to Logan. He unfolded it carefully, then held it up so everyone could see. In the bright, bold colors of childhood art, she had drawn herself sitting on a log with Echo beside her. Behind them stood the adult bears, protective and attentive. But what caught Logan's breath was how she had drawn the humans. Himself, Savannah, Jacob, and the rest of the research team, standing in a circle around them all, creating a protective boundary that encompassed both human child and bear family. "It's all of us," Lily explained simply. "We're all protecting each other." The profound truth in her childish observation brought unexpected tears to Logan's eyes. He remembered the fear that had gripped him that day on the mountainside, the certainty that humans and bears were natural enemies locked in an ancient conflict. How far they had all come from that moment of terror. "That's exactly right, Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's what we're learning to do." As Savannah led her daughter off to bed, Logan pinned the drawing to the research station's bulletin board. It joined dozens of scientific charts, data printouts, and observation schedules. But somehow, in its simple truth, it seemed to capture the essence of their work more perfectly than all the technical documents combined. Outside, as darkness settled over the mountains, a lone howl echoed through the night. Kodiak calling to mark his territory. The sound no longer sparked fear in Logan's heart, but rather a sense of privilege that he had been allowed to glimpse a deeper truth about the natural world and humanity's place within it. In the morning, they would return to the meadow, where a human child and a bear family continued to rewrite the story of what was possible between species long considered irreconcilable enemies. And in that new story lay hope, not just for these particular bears and this particular child, but for a world in which the boundaries between human and wild might be understood not as battle lines, but as thresholds of possibility. As if echoing this thought, a second howl joined the first, Kiana's voice blending with her mate's in the darkness. And from the research station, a small window illuminated by the warm glow of a nightlight, came the delighted voice of a child who recognized the call and understood it not as a threat, but as a good-night wish from friends who happened to have fur and claws instead of clothes and hands. "Good night, Kodiak. Good night, Kiana," Lily called out her window. "Sweet dreams." In the forest below, the bear family settled into their den for the night, the cubs curled against their mother's warm fur, the father standing guard at the entrance. And somewhere in the space between human understanding and wild instinct, a connection continued to grow. A bridge built by a falling bear, a brave biologist, and a baby whose innocent heart recognized no boundaries between species. A bridge that might, in time, lead humanity back to a relationship with the natural world that had been lost but never forgotten. a relationship of mutual respect, recognition, and protection. A relationship where what a bear does and what a child understands can reshape our understanding of what it means to share this planet with other thinking, feeling beings. A relationship that began with fear on a stormy mountainside but transformed into something extraordinary. A story of connection that would be told and retold, studied and celebrated, as proof of what is possible when humans look beyond their fears and recognize the intelligence and emotion that exist in the eyes of creatures they once only feared. In the quiet darkness of the Montana night, under stars that had witnessed the long history of both species, a new chapter in that shared history was being written, and at its heart was a simple truth that a child could understand, but that science was only beginning to explore. That the boundaries between human and animal were not as absolute as humanity had believed. That connection was possible across differences of form and language and history. That, in the meeting of a child's curious hand and a bear's gentle curiosity, lay the seed of a new understanding. A glimpse of a future where humans might find their way back to being not masters of the natural world, but simply one more voice in its complex, beautiful chorus.